think is lurking in one way or another in all of the four statements that we had tonight. And that is, there are so many good and compelling reasons for what Ryerson is doing as a leader in terms of this integration with the city. But I couldn't help but note that a number of the panelists went back in time and spoke to the moment where a space was actually created, where at a certain stage in people's lives, although this extends clearly into lifelong learning now, there was a possibility of some remove from the city, of a place of reflection, a place in which one could be critical of all the workings of daily commercial life, and in some ways relieved from the pressures of it. And this goes to this whole question of education versus training. We're actually trying to give people, and I really throw this out to all of you who are students in the audience, a time and a place in your lives when you can step out of received assumptions about what you're going to do, received assumptions about where society is going, and ask some very fundamental questions. And to the extent that universities and colleges become more and more interwoven in the web and rhythms of the city, and they are surrounded 360 degrees by the commercial life of the city and all the pressures of the city, how does one at the same time not lose that character or that quality, that characteristic, that opportunity for madness that will evoke exploration, the control that Craig spoke of? How does one avoid that? How do you reconcile these two things? On the one hand, all the desirable features of integration, and on the other, creating that space and time for critical reflection.
Let me begin by giving an example of it, and then take it further. I'll use the photograph that Eb put up. If you're a student in the Ted Rogers School of Management, you certainly are in the city as you walk along Dundas. You're certainly in the city when you open the door, but when you go up the escalator or take the elevator, you're in an environment that's very, very separate from the city, and you are in an environment that is no different than if you were in a suburban campus or in a quiet location. So, and if you looked at Ed's picture carefully, you would even see the architect put a garden in the middle, and for all intents and purposes, when you're there, you think you're on the first floor of the building, and you think you're away from the city. And I know when we're talking to Craig and Zeiler about the Student Learning Center, these same issues come up. So architecture itself plays a big role. That said, you're never going to have Walden's Pond in the middle of Toronto with these long walks. The reality is that you're in a very, very dense urban city. But I don't think it takes anything away from the opportunity for the solitude, for the independence, for the academic freedom, and all the important values that any university would have. I think we make almost an excuse that we got to build a wall around ourselves, when I think that's just an excuse. I think you can have the value system that the walls are trying to protect by the integration in the city. But I do think clever architecture that is sympathetic to the needs of a university, its faculty and its students, for those traditional values is extremely important. And I think the architects that we have had and will have demonstrate that it's all very, very possible.
So I think that's a terrific start of an answer, and it's a great segue to the architects. If not the ivy-covered masonry walls. What are the architectural devices in a 21st century city that actually create that atmosphere, that sense that Sheldon has begun to describe?
If I could just say something very quickly, no offense, Ken, but I think the distinction between the commercial world and the university, especially in Ryerson's case, is somewhat artificial, because a university is essentially a commercial place too. I mean, we can't forget that. And if you're working on university projects like we are, and if you're administrating a university, you know full well that there's a budget that has to be followed, and there's money that has to be accommodated, and they have to turn over enough money to be successful in the future. If they don't make money, they can't exist in the future. If they don't manage their money, they can't exist in the future. Those are the same things that are going through the pizza shop on the corner. It is all business. So we shouldn't I think, be trite about the fact that these worlds really are very, very closely connected. And I think young people today recognize that. They recognize that their means to move forward is not just about philosophy, and it's not just about commerce. And nobody makes those distinctions and is successful. So I think that in a certain way, to divide the two is a little maybe passé.
Well, okay, I could debate you. I'm really talking about how they coexist, rather than being divided. And what is it in the physical environment that allows them to coexist in a productive and vital way? But let me throw it to the other two.
Well, I mean, can you hear me? The problem is that the city is, in fact, not that much different from university. The same way as a section of the university has to do its actual work, it has to be isolated. The same way in which an office has to be isolated to do its work. So you have a similar condition, that only you have kind of a working environment. But on the other hand, you don't want that working environment so isolated that it is totally isolated, that you can't connect back to the other life. So that the importance is to have this stream that moves through it and brings people to it in all various ways. And the kind of the relaxation, have your coffee or whatever, you can be in the public, but when you have to do a piece of work, you have to be isolated. But that hasn't to be an hour drive, but it could be just a step up a stair. And so therefore, this isolation is important in order to do the work that the university has to do, and it has to be connected again with the city. So this is a very natural flow, in the same way in which, our office works. We are close to the street, but we have to be isolated. We can't talk to the street. I mean, it doesn't work if somebody looks over your computer and tells you what to do. You have to kind of be in isolation to do that work, in isolation with similar people, and the discussion that arrives out of that.
Will, would you want to answer?
The question is a very sort of architectural question. I'm not sure the architects can actually answer many of these things. But we do actually, because the problem lies somewhere else. On the other hand, I was in OCAD yesterday, which actually proves the point, because it's discussing this on my old client party, for example, and they complained there are too many walls. I said, well, we told you so in 2001. Now they've actually written them out. So one of the problems, I think, is very clear and over-prescribed briefs that are given to our office. So we can tear up the green. I think that's a pretty good starting point. You must agree, Peter, or Bob, wherever you are. It just costs you money to put in stuff that you actually don't need. So I think that it has to be flexible. Now, look at the room here. This would be quite good as part of a university to do with this. There are lots, but it has a particular character. It has a quality. It has something where you want to be in this room, but there are plenty of rooms in the city you don't want to be in. And many of those rooms you don't want to be in are, sadly enough, the main universities that exist in the city. So it's about having a sense of individuality, of creating a place, because every university, every city in the world is in competition with each other in the stakes of learning and creating this place. So it's right to say, what is a place that actually can be a decent place to integrate the city with the idea of learning and education until people die, and is it going to be a pleasant place to be? So you say, well, what's the biggest enemy of achieving that? I believe there are three things. People have an idea of what a student is. I think we should question that. People have an idea of what a university is. It's buildings around a quadrangle. Well, nice as a quadrangle might be, not necessarily. I believe, in fact, that urban designers are a real problem. And I think that people have an idea of what a city is. And I think that everything's up for grabs, all to be discussed. And the university, the true role of the university is to reinterpret what all those things are and to redefine it. And that would then have architectural implications. And the architects need to be a part of that debate, in my view. And it's too precious a debate to be left to the Senate. So, in this city, I think the city is not well served by the city planning body. They are truly boring, but that's okay. We can deal with boring. What we can't deal with is being opinionated and boring.
Actually, you've given me a great segue to the realm of shifting now, which is what, if you listen to Sheldon describe, as I have for some years, the fact that there are things that are being accomplished, there are other things that are on the radar screen, and there are always another set of things that are just a twinkle in his eye beyond the radar screen that come up. And the underlying issue is one of indeterminacy. There is the snowball effect. You never quite know where this is going to go. And this runs foursquare into what has been one of the major preoccupations of city planning for much of the latter part of the 20th century, and hopefully we're shifting into something new, which is the illusion of total predictability. That you would be able to take a part of the city and say, this is a such and such district, this is what's going to be there, we can count the traffic, we know how many toilets are going to flush every given hour of the day, because we know exactly what the uses will be, we know exactly what the form of the buildings will be, etc. And yet what's happening around Ryerson, and many ways incited by Ryerson, is this marvelous inability to predict the fact that the world is unfolding in all kinds of interesting ways. Almost every venture that Ryerson gets involved in has double or triple use, and in fact inspires something else. Now, I'll throw the question back to all of you, as people who deal with the physical environment, not only the physical environment, but all the underlying shaping forces. This feels like a pretty big change. How well are we coping with this?
May I just say something? I think if you look back, the city has just undergone a similar problem, because we thought that it would be wonderful to separate the city in the business district, the industrial district, the entertainment district, the housing district, and put them all as big blocks around there, and we realized that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because the connections didn't work anymore, and traffic became a burden. And now we slowly putting housing in the business district. We put the entertainment district not as a single clump in the city, but parts of it in various parts of the city. And this integration of the city is now the same thing as a university. That isn't a clump anymore, but it's a part of the city. It becomes integrated with it. And the key point is really distances and relationships. And your life isn't just that you are either educated or either entertained or either do that, but your life is kind of a continuous circle or cycle of these elements that move into each other. And they move in a different way. I mean, not necessarily that from 8 to 5 you do that, and from 5 to 9 you do that. Our life is far more changing now. And this is what is happening. And the university is kind of a natural part of that growth pattern.
I always say that the best laid plans never get made, which is a kind of a commentary on the fact that making a plan already defines its eventual dissolution. So the idea that cities can be planned, and I agree completely with Will, is that it implies, again, a certain amount of domination and control in your ideology. It's sometimes better to drop a stone in the puddle and see how the water ripples, rather than make the ripple and see what kind of stone comes out. And so I believe that at a certain extent what Ryerson is doing, what other strong institutions are doing, is dropping the pebbles rather than defining the ripples. And I think this is one way to look at it. The other thing I want to say, though, and again, this is kind of critical. We talk about cities as though they're wonderful places. And yeah, they are, but going back again to what Will said, they're also sort of crazy places. And there are kinds of things that we have a hard time with. I mean, making a student learning center, for example, it will have a portion of the building which is open for 24 hours. What does that mean? Does that mean that every person that can't find a bed will be looking to sleep inside the new Ryerson Student Learning Center? And if they did, should we say no to them? And if we do say no to them, then what? So there are questions that still don't have answers. And it's very hard in a university like Ryerson, it's so urban, to contend with this kind of huge range of wonderfully delicate, young, fresh-faced, perfect students, and people who have no job, no money, and lost their family in a car accident or something. So, those are, I think, in the world of indeterminacy, the hard questions that maybe don't have easy answers.
But we can't forget that our whole development is moving towards the city. 80% of the people in Ontario now live in the city. Well, they didn't live in the city 50 years ago.
The traditionally accepted statistic is that there are more than 51% of the people living in cities today.
No, it's 80%.
Yeah, more than 50%. So the majority of people are living in cities, and theoretically that suggests that we are city dwellers, but I don't buy that. First of all, if you take the ratios of those that did not live in cities at the time at which most people didn't, there were very, very small numbers of people. I think something like 250,000, 300,000 years ago, there were only about 500,000 people spread across the face of the entire surface of the earth. Now those ratios have changed, but I'm not sure that cities have all the answers, or that they're so perfect.
No, I haven't answered, but the growth is
I'm
towards
going
the
to let
city.
Sheldon break into this.
And the point is, we have to see how can we make that growth grow naturally, not kind of the way this kind of settlements way out in the country, etc. And how do we can organize it?
I'm going to try to question. I wanted to pick up on Craig's comment about the pebble in the water. Once in a while, people will see a presentation like that and think there was a plan behind it. There wasn't a plan. It's a recital of what happened that looks like a plan. But what did happen, and I will take you back to when I visited NYU, they had a lecture done by a number of the past presidents. And they said the job of the president is to tell stories. And in some sense, if you actually watch what I've been doing, is I've been telling stories. And I would try to, in the story, to draw pictures for people. But ultimately, the pictures were other people filling in a lot of the blanks, and I would draw one picture, and that might have been a pebble. And then the ripples would have been other people making the picture that much better. So where I think I'm not differing from Craig, I think it's not throwing in the pebble, I think it's throwing in a rock. I think you really got to stir things up. I think you got to get people, you got to say things, you got to help people see what they forgot to look at. The things that we have been looking at for year after year after year, and we don't ever see it anymore. You got to see it, and then you got to be a critic of it, and you got to boil the blood. You got to make people uncomfortable. You got to say things that people don't want to sometimes hear, because that's the rock and the pebble that brings other people to maybe reflect upon. So I don't think there's a plan in the traditional sense of going from A to Z, but I think there is a plan, and the plan is to tell a story that excites people and wakes them up. And I've been criticized for saying certain words that my director of communications doesn't want me to say, but it is a reflection of the intent to have people say that poor is not good enough and we can do better. And so you throw this rock in and you expect people a lot smarter than you and with greater vision than you to begin to do great things. And that's what happens. But it really requires a rock, not a pebble. Promise that they would be.
Yes, exactly. I completely agree with that. So I would like to know your vision of the inconvenience in cars in the corner between Gerard, Queen, Bay, and Jarvis basically should be. Because I believe that one thing that Toronto is missing, pedestrians are driven underground in this place. Yeah, and coming from Europe, that is absurd. Yeah, because life happens above the ground. Underground, we don't want to be done. So, to rejuvenate basically the core of Toronto, and with that, what that's all.
I think that's an extremely good point. And there's a lot of breeding in this city because they live like rabbits.
Prolific.
On the other hand, I think that there are a number of things that can be done, and clearly the reliance on cars in the city is absurd and it does get in the way. On the other hand, there's a very rigid street pattern which could be very beautiful, and in most cases it's not. And there are a number of things that can be done about that, and you only have to look to other cities around the world, see how they handle traffic within larger cities than this country. You can spend a lot of money, as they just done recently on the waterfront in Shanghai, and actually tunneling it, but they got a lot of banks, so they can afford to do that. Or, as in London on Exhibition Road, you can just put which is very much Dutch, but you can put a shared service. That automatically slows the traffic down. I'm not totally against traffic with the service business. It's about the pedestrian living with the traffic and then reducing it so it behaves properly. Could do a lot by having smaller cars.
The cheapest way to get rid of cars is to remove the parking spaces. That doesn't cost anything.
Charge people. I mean, there are all sorts of mechanisms, but not if you have Mr. Ford coming.
Yeah, I just wondered, are these university buildings open to the general public for, are there any spaces that are in use by the general public, or are these mainly for the university students? Because I saw Sobeys that's being planned in one of your buildings. So is that going to be a trend that the general public will be allowed to use the buildings?
The question, repeat the
Let
question.
me repeat the question. I think,
The microphone would be good.
I don't know if everybody heard the question, but I think it comes down to what extent are the university buildings we've been seeing going to be open to the general public? Are they open to the general public?
Yes.
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, you could move into and walk through any of our buildings, but there's going to be obviously doors locked in cases of laboratories, etc., etc. But generally, there's no student pass to get into the buildings except in the evening, but they're generally open for anyone in the city to walk through and see them.
I just want to make a parenthetical comment here. We take that for granted, but this is not so in many places. For example, at Yale University, which is right in the heart of New Haven, students are the only ones who can enter university buildings, and they're required to carry around a card which unlocks gates, and without that pass you can't even penetrate the university. So this is a rare quality that we should really treasure and be happy to have.
It's not only true of Ryerson. You can walk through the U of T buildings, the York buildings, OCAD, etc. And obviously there are certain locations that are difficult. But I wanted to pick up a very, very important point Craig mentioned. And we know this debate at the university, and that is the following. You're going to have a student learning center on Yonge Street. We know it's critically important to have very, very good retail on the ground level. Everyone understands that. But how do you have a lock on the door to move from the retail on Yonge Street into the university part? Do you use a card? Is there a gate? Are there watchers? Well, Craig commented on the problem. And it is not a non-trivial problem for the university to deal with, and there's many, many different opinions on it. No one is going to have the right answer. Everyone will have an opinion and will take one position or the other. But that's a very, very good example of the tension that exists between the city and the university, especially on Yonge Street. So I don't want to trivialize everything by saying, oh, it's an obvious answer, because Craig's comment about how you move between the ground floor of Yonge Street to the upper levels on a 24/7 is a non-trivial issue for the university, and we're wrestling with it as we speak.
Anyone else?
Throughout this discussion, you've been sort of contrasting the urban university of Ryerson with the sort of island tower isolated model of the university. But there's another sort of twin strand of urban universities that aren't so isolated, I guess, throughout history, in the sense that they're really involved in shaping the politics and economics of current societies. Like I'm thinking of like revolutionary student movements and things like that. And I'm just wondering, because Ryan seems to be very commercially integrated and physically integrated with the city, but how does that work with the sort of urban university model of sort of political and social engagement with society?
Yeah, the question starts from the fact that we've been discussing Ryerson as a model of an integrated university, and then there are other universities that are more separate, but what about another alternative of universities or movements that are very politically engaged, and I assume critically engaged is what you mean, and where is the opportunity for that kind of university experience?
try and answer it. Let me say something about Ryerson in its sort of current condition. I think it's a very special condition, which is going to be fantastic, because it actually does reflect, it's not the most beautiful place in the world, it has its moments, but it does reflect the needs of a changing body of students, which will be very aging. So, if you are a mother with a child, you need crash, you need nursery facilities. That's great. You need to go shopping. And it doesn't matter who you are, you need to do all these things within easy reach of where you might be participating in learning. I have also up the ground is the idea of how long a course does. If you have a 10-hour course, that means logically you have a 5-minute course. That would be it's like a little dose of this stuff. And that would be quite interesting. It's a terrible assumption. But I didn't really understand your question in terms of saying politics. But to me, it's nothing but it's just common sense.
There are revolutions going on inside of universities. They're just maybe different than going out and burning things. If you go to the DMZ, which Sheldon mentioned earlier today, there are all kinds of crazy things going on there. People manipulating their political views towards a larger society. They're working very hard to have political values in their work. And I love the name DMZ. It's like demilitarized zone, which is probably more like what it really is. So I think there are, in certain ways, revolutions occurring in universities like Ryerson. They're just slightly different than they were in the 60s. We may see a resurgence of that if the politics and economics continue to drift in the way that they are. But let's hope that the revolutions are constructive.
I think, sorry to interrupt. I do think it's very, very important. But I do think going forward, democratic value, the idea of democratic society is severely challenged. I think there is a role for the universities as they, in my opinion, will become more privatized in many, many ways, to hang on to that notion. And it's that threat. And I think one has to remember that. Might have something to do with the question.
Hi.
I'll just make a very quick comment, if I could. There's as much, call it political activity, social activity, criticism at Ryerson as any university, and there is something that one thinks just because you are able to deal in public-private partnerships with the Best Buy or Canadian Tire, it must mean that you're not doing those things. Well, these things are totally different. I can assure you the academic freedom and the ability for our colleagues to take on causes, which you will read in the newspaper all the time, is not one bit jeopardized or threatened by any activity we take with regard to the development of the university. And if it was, then we wouldn't ever think of doing it. It never is a threat at all.
Question?
Okay.
Yes, I'm interested, and I didn't hear the first question properly because it was down in front there, but can everybody hear me?
No, but there's
Okay.
There's mics right here.
Oh, Dar, why don't you come up to the mic, and meanwhile, I'm going to ask this gentleman who's standing in the mic here, I didn't see you. Please come up.
Hi, I'm a student at Ryerson University. I just had a comment about what Sheldon was saying about the Ted Rogers School of Management and how there is a garden outside in there. But as a student who uses the actual space, I rarely see students actually use the garden in there. In fact, to us, it seems as though it is a concrete garden. And also in terms of the university giving back to the city, is there a way that we can say that the city also has to give back something to the university? Because it seems as though, when are we actually going to be asking the university students about how they feel about being displaced in terms of studying around shopping malls and retail and commercial spaces? And I know that that is the fact that we need to, I guess, address, and that what we're actually facing as students at Ryerson. But what does this partnership with corporations and whatnot do to us?
I think there were two questions. Is a garden like the one in Ted Rogers useful? And the second
Yes.
question was, what can cities give back to universities?
And mostly in terms of the educational costs, because as well also was saying earlier, with the poor world economy, there is a decrease in public funding. What does that have to do with the educational cost? Will it increase dramatically, especially with the increase in, I guess, the master planning of the university and the changes that we're going to be facing in the next few
Okay,
years?
you only get one question. Which one would you want?
The only one I could answer. Let me try the one that I could respond to, and that is, what does the city give back to the university? And let me count the ways. One of them is that they gave back to the university a street, not bad. The other thing that they do for us is they give us density. The other thing that they do for us, which is very important, is give us speed. The other thing they do is lend talent to us. So there's a lot of different ways that a city can give to a university. And it's also, if you don't have a city that wants to develop with you, you have lots of problems, because you have neighbors, and neighbors have properties, and they care about their properties and the property values. So when you put up a big building, you put shadows, you do a lot of things. Without the city trying to mediate and trying to find the places where the intersection is livable for both, you are going to be stymied. So there's a lot of ways where working with the city and having the good relationships and what you could really say is a win-win is critically important. And I can tell you quite sincerely that a lot of the development you saw, there were a lot of bruises, not only at Ryerson, and a lot of accommodations, but for every bruise we had, I'm sure the city had one, and that's the nature of the game. But so I do think it's a partnership, and I don't use the word lightly. I think there's a lot of ways that Ryerson has benefited and will benefit by the city, and a lot of ways the city will benefit from Ryerson.